She didn't think much of the stray mutt at first. Just a nervous dog sniffing around her ranch like it had been lost in the desert too long. But when it refused to leave, then bolted straight into the Badlands like it was chasing something only it could smell, she saddled up and followed. What she found wasn't just a ghost town. It was a secret buried so deep, even the locals refused to speak its name. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories where small choices lead to impossible discoveries, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story is even more unbelievable than this one. She first noticed it circling the chicken coop just after sunrise, ears back, ribs showing, tail tucked low in the dust. The dog wasn't local. She would have known. Out here, every coyote hybrid, every ranch hound, every cattle dog had a name and a story attached to it, and this one didn't. It moved like it had been running for miles but had nowhere left to go. She stepped onto the porch with her coffee, still in her sleep shirt and boots, and the mutt froze. Then it sat down, slow and deliberate, like it had made a decision it wasn't quite proud of. She didn't speak at first. Sometimes animals needed quiet more than they needed food, but the dog watched her, those uneven amber eyes tracking every breath she took like she was the last thing left in the world worth trusting. Eventually, she set out a shallow bowl of water and a half slice of cornbread from the night before, placing it near the edge of the porch where the sun hadn't yet touched. The dog sniffed but didn't eat, just stared, head cocked, legs tense. She'd seen wounded things act like that before, too tired to accept kindness, too scared to run. By late afternoon, the dog still hadn't moved on. It stayed just beyond the fence, pacing a little, then stopping again to sit in the dirt like it was waiting for something specific. She tried calling it closer with a soft whistle, tried tossing it some jerky from the smokehouse. Nothing worked. That night, she left a blanket on the porch and cracked the back door just enough for the dog to come in if it got cold. But come morning, the blanket was untouched, and the dog was gone. She figured that was that. There was always something out there, coyotes, javelinas, old mining pits, and the desert didn't care if you limped or starved or begged. Still, a strange weight followed her through chores that morning, like the dog had taken something with it she hadn't realized was missing. But just as she finished mucking out the barn, there it was again. Standing in the far end of the corral, panting hard, one paw lifted like it had run a marathon just to get back, and then it bolted. No sound, no warning, just turned and tore off through the brush like it had seen a ghost. She didn't think, didn't saddle her horse or grab her rifle. She just ran after it, heart pounding, boots thudding against dry earth. Every instinct told her to stop, to turn back, but the dog had looked at her, really looked before it ran, and something in that look pulled her forward. It didn't feel like she was chasing the dog. It felt like it was leading her somewhere. She grabbed the reins of her mare halfway down the hill, breath ragged and boots filling with gravel. The dog had vanished past the dry creek bed, and her lungs burned from chasing it on foot. The desert didn't offer second chances if you lost something in the open. The sun swallowed it. But this wasn't about the dog anymore. It was about the way it had looked at her. That moment, brief as lightning, had branded her with something she couldn't name, like the dog had handed her a key and dared her to find the door. With the saddle cinched and her rifle slung across her back, she kicked the mare into motion. The land ahead was hard-packed and stretched for miles, the kind of place men got lost and were never found. But the dog's tracks were clear, desperate, straight, and fast. She followed them through dry ravines and yucca thickets, past the remains of a collapsed windmill and a barbed wire fence so old it had rusted into the sand. The wind picked up, hot and sharp, dragging whispers through the brush like it carried stories too tired to speak out loud. She didn't call out. There was no sense in it. Whatever the dog was chasing or running from was deeper than sound could reach. After nearly an hour, the terrain changed. The land sloped downward where it shouldn't have, dipping into a canyon she didn't remember seeing on any of her maps. That was strange in itself. She'd ridden this stretch 100 times. But this dip, this shadowed crease in the land, had never been there before. Her mare hesitated at the rim, snorting, ears pinned flat. Below, a haze of heat shimmered like a mirage, but the tracks continued down into the strange hollow, clear as if someone had stamped them into the earth just seconds ago. She dismounted, patting the horse's flank, and led it by the reins. Step by step, the silence grew thicker, the kind of silence that felt intentional, like the world had hit pause and was watching to see what she'd do next. When she reached the base of the hollow, The land flattened into a dry basin ringed by brittle mesquite and cactus, and there, just past a bent wagon wheel half buried in sand, stood a row of buildings. She froze. 6, maybe 7 of them. All wooden, all silent, their shapes rising out of the ground like memories. A saloon with half its sign missing. A general store with the windows boarded shut. A feed house. A stable. An old church with a broken bell that hung still in its tower. No birds, no wind, no sound at all. And in front of the saloon, seated neatly on its haunches with its ears alert and its tongue hanging, was the dog, waiting for her. She stood motionless, staring at the buildings as if they might vanish if she blinked too hard. The dog panted quietly at the edge of the boardwalk, its tail thumping once against the sun-bleached wood, then going still again. It didn't bark, didn't move, just watched her, like it was asking what took her so long. The ghost town looked more preserved than abandoned. Dust clung to windowsills and brush had claimed the alleys between buildings, but the structures stood firm against time. No bullet holes, no burn marks, no signs of collapse, just stillness. And that stillness unsettled her more than ruin ever could. She led her mare cautiously past the first storefront. The sign overhead was too faded to read, but the display windows still held empty glass bottles and rusted tin wares behind spider-webbed panes. The street was wide, unnaturally so, as if expecting a parade that never came. Her boots left the only fresh prints in the sand, and every step echoed in her chest louder than it should. She reached the saloon and hesitated. Its double doors hung slightly ajar, one listing to the side like it had been held open too long. The dog finally moved, slipping inside without a sound, tail low and ears perked forward. She followed, hand hovering near the grip of her revolver. Inside, the air was stale but not rotten, the kind of still air that had been undisturbed for years but not decades. Tables and chairs were arranged in neat disarray. One poker hand still sat on a table in the corner, as if someone had been called away mid-game and never returned. The bar had a crack running through its center, and behind it stood an upright piano with a closed lid. The entire room felt posed like a memory caught mid-breath. She walked to the poker table and studied the cards. They were brittle at the edges but otherwise untouched. One card had a fingerprint smudged across the back in something that looked too fresh to be dust. A king of spades, face up. Then she noticed something stranger. Her mare tied just outside had gone completely quiet. No shifting, no whinnying. Even the cicadas that usually filled the afternoon heat had fallen silent. And beneath the silence, she heard it, a low creak, slow and deliberate. She turned her head toward the hallway behind the bar. The door there, small and painted the same color as the wall, was inching open on its own. The dog stood in front of it now, staring down into the dark like it already knew what was there, like it had led her here on purpose. Her fingers brushed the grip of her revolver, but she didn't draw. Not yet. Instead, she took one slow step forward, toward the dark, and the door opened wider to let her in. The hinges moaned as the door gave way, swinging wider like it had been waiting for her. Inside was nothing but a narrow staircase descending into cool shadow. Stone steps, not wood cut clean, like someone had taken care to carve them properly. That alone gave her pause. Towns like this didn't dig stone cellars unless they were hiding something worth burying deep. The dog didn't follow her down. It sat at the top of the stairs, body tense, eyes locked on her. There was no fear in its posture, only expectation, like this was her part now, and the dog had done what it came to do. She pulled the small lantern from her saddlebag, lit it with shaking fingers, and took the first step. The air grew colder with each descent. Dust turned to grit beneath her boots. 10 steps down, then 15. Then the staircase turned. The lantern cast long shadows against the walls, and the flames sputtered as if reacting to something she couldn't see. At the base, the cellar opened into a single room. Stone walls, a wooden beam ceiling blackened from age, one table in the center, nothing on it. Shelves along the far wall held glass jars, some empty, some sealed with wax, their contents long congealed. She stepped forward, sweeping the lantern slowly, and that's when she saw it. Footprints, fresh ones, not hers, smaller, barefoot, leading away from the staircase and circling the far edge of the room. The prints were smudged in places, as if the person had hesitated or turned quickly, but they were unmistakably new. She followed them to the back wall, where a wooden cabinet stood slightly ajar. Inside, a stack of old cloth, a rusted oil lamp, and a small book wedged between two broken jars. She pulled the book free, brushing dust from the cracked leather cover. No title. The first page was a list of names, all written in the same neat hand. Beside each name, a date. All the dates ended the same year, 1889. All except the last one blank. No date, just a name she recognized, her own. She stumbled back from the shelf like it had bitten her. The book dropped from her hands, hitting the floor with a hollow thud. The lantern flame flared for a moment, then steadied. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hands trembled. This wasn't just a ghost town. It wasn't just abandoned. It remembered her. From the top of the stairs, the dog let out a single bark. Short, sharp, almost like a warning. Then came the sound. Not the door, not her own breath. Something below the floorboards. A low scraping, a shuffle, then silence again. She backed toward the staircase, never turning her back on the cabinet. The dog was still waiting at the top, and for the first time, she realized she wasn't alone down there. She climbed the steps without turning her back, lantern still flickering in her grip. The sound had stopped, but the air hadn't shifted back to normal. It felt heavy now, charged, like lightning was about to strike even though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. When she stepped into the saloon again, the dog rose and quietly walked ahead of her, slipping back into the sunlit street, as if satisfied she'd seen enough for now. She closed the cellar door behind her, but not all the way. Something told her sealing it would be a mistake. Instead, she let it rest in its warped frame, just slightly ajar, listening for any hint of that sound returning. The silence that followed felt worse than noise. Her heart thudded against her ribs, sweat cold along her back. She needed air and distance. Outside, the street looked the same as before. Too still, too perfect. But now it didn't feel forgotten, it felt watched. The dog had trotted halfway down the main road and was sitting beside what looked like an old blacksmith shop, tail twitching like it was impatient for her to catch up. She followed, still shaken, still gripping the lantern even in daylight. Inside the shop, sunlight poured through slats in the walls, cutting sharp beams through the dust. A workbench sat under a window, pocked with age. Tongs, hammers, and rusted nails were neatly arranged. But the center of the room was empty. No forge, no horseshoes, just wood. And beneath that wood, a square cut in the floor, a trapdoor. She didn't move at first, just listened. No wind, no buzzing flies, just the soft scuff of the dog's nails behind her. Then there it was again, faint. The same scratching sound, only slower now. As if whatever was beneath had heard her approaching and gone still. She knelt beside the trapdoor and placed her hand flat on it. It was warm, warmer than the rest of the floor. And when she leaned in, pressing her ear to the wood, she heard it again. A whisper, not words, just breath, ragged and low, like someone trying to inhale through broken lungs. She jerked back and stood, pulse surging in her throat. The dog didn't react, didn't whine or bark, just looked at her. And in its eyes, she didn't see fear. She saw expectation, like it was waiting for her to understand. She didn't open the trapdoor. Not yet. Not until she could make sense of the name in the book. Not until she could figure out how a town that wasn't on any map knew who she was. But she couldn't leave either, because she understood now. The dog hadn't been running away. It had come to find her, and whatever was beneath this town had been waiting for her to arrive. She returned to the saloon as the sun dipped lower, dragging long shadows across the empty street like fingers reaching for something long gone. The cellar door remained ajar, unchanged, like it had frozen mid-thought. She didn't go down again, not yet. Instead, she found herself drawn back to the piano. It stood there in the quiet, upright and proud, even if the keys were yellowed and warped. Something about it felt important, though she couldn't say why. On impulse, she lifted the bench lid. Inside was a scatter of dust, a few rusted nails, and beneath them, a bundle of paper wrapped in waxed cloth. She lifted it out gently, her hand steady now from the silence, not from calm. The cloth unraveled like it had been waiting to breathe, and within it lay a stack of old letters tied together with twine. She didn't recognize the handwriting. It was elegant, the kind of penmanship people used when they thought their words might last forever. She thumbed through the dates on the envelopes: 1887, 1888, early 1889. Then she paused. The last envelope bore no postage, no seal, just a name, hers, scrawled in the same hand, but shakier. The ink had bled at the edges, like it had been written in a hurry or by a trembling hand. She sat down slowly on the dusty piano bench, laid the bundle across her lap, and opened the top letter. The contents made her breath catch. It wasn't addressed to her directly, but to someone named Clara Mayfield, a name she hadn't heard since childhood. A cousin her grandmother used to mention in passing, always with a wistful tone. Clara had vanished, the story went, walked off into the desert after her brother died and was never seen again. She was the reason their family stopped speaking to the Mayfields, the reason some names weren't welcome at the table. But here, in her hands, were letters written by Clara. Descriptions of this very town, the buildings, the saloon, the church, the people many of whom she claimed were not dead, but changed. Clara wrote of a debt the town owed, of a pact made beneath the church altar, sealed in blood and silence, and always, always the refrain. The land remembers, the land decides. The more she read, the colder she became. Clara had signed every letter the same way. For whoever finds this, if you carry the Mayfield blood, the town already knows you. Listen for the dog. It's the only thing that never lies. Her stomach turned to ice. She looked toward the doorway, and there was the dog still waiting outside, staring through the empty saloon door like it had known she'd find the letters all along. She wasn't just trespassing. She was tied to this place in ways she didn't yet understand. The town hadn't chosen her by accident. It had called her home. She stepped out of the saloon into the dying light, letters clutched tight in her hand, eyes on the dog that still hadn't moved. The street felt heavier now, not just silent, expectant, like the buildings were holding their breath, like the town itself was listening. She scanned the ridge beyond the stable, something prickling at the back of her neck. The dog turned its head sharply, ears standing tall. Then she saw him. A man stood at the edge of the road, half in shadow, his frame outlined by the setting sunday. He didn't wear a hat, but his coat was long and old-fashioned, duster length, frayed at the hem. He didn't look like a ghost. His boots kicked up dust. His hands rested at his sides. But there was something off about him. Something still. "Evenin'," he called. Voice rasped and cracked like it had spent decades disused. She said nothing. He took a few steps closer, the way someone would approach a skittish horse. "Didn't mean to startle you. I figured you'd be coming soon." Still, she said nothing. Her fingers tightened around the bundle of letters. He nodded toward them. "Clara left those for you." She hoped someone in the family line would listen. Her mouth went dry. "How do you know my name?" The man's face twitched at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "I know more than that," he said. "You were born in Silt Creek. Parents split when you were 7. Took to ranching young. Got a scar under your left elbow from a fence wire that snapped back. That right?" She said nothing. "That dog showed up when the town was ready," he continued. "Always does. When the bloodline calls back someone, it's owed." "What do you mean, owed?" Her voice finally broke through the dry air, sharp with suspicion. The man stepped closer. "What do you think this town is? A forgotten mining camp? A trick of the desert?" He shook his head slowly. "It's a memory that refused to fade. And memory, when strong enough, keeps its shape." The words felt rehearsed, like he'd spoken them before. Maybe many times. Maybe to no one. Maybe to her before she was born. She glanced toward the church steeple at the far end of the street. The bell hadn't moved, but she could feel it in her chest like it wanted to ring. "You were meant to see this place," the man said, "because you come from the ones who broke it." She looked down at the letters again. Clara had never said what the debt was, only that the land remembered. "What happens now?" she asked, voice lower than before. The man's eyes softened, just a little. "That depends on whether you open the door beneath the church," he said, "or walk away and pretend you never saw any of this." The dog looked up at her, waiting. She stood at the foot of the old church steps as twilight deepened into full dusk. The windows glowed faintly in the fading light, not from within, but from the memory of sunlight caught in old glass. Her boots creaked as she climbed, each step echoing louder than it should have. The wooden doors were shut, but unlocked. She pushed them open with both hands, the hinges crying out like something hadn't moved them in years. Inside, the pews were still in place, dust-covered, worn down at the edges where generations of elbows once leaned in prayer. The altar stood plain and bare, save for a tarnished brass cross lying flat like someone had dropped it and never picked it up. She didn't see the stranger anymore, but she didn't need to. His words clung to the air. The dog didn't follow her in this time. It sat at the bottom of the steps, eyes fixed on her like a sentry. Inside the church, the silence was thicker than it had been anywhere else in town. It was the kind of quiet that hummed, the kind that watched. She walked the aisle slowly, remembering the letters, the cellar, the whisper beneath the trapdoor. The altar sat on a platform, raised by 3 steps. Behind it, heavy velvet curtains sagged from iron rods. She stepped around them, looking for anything out of place. And there it was, a hatch, square and sunken into the floor just behind the pulpit. Not hidden, not even locked. She knelt beside it and ran her fingers along the edge. Symbols were carved into the wood, delicate, looping, unfamiliar. Not language, more like intent. Beneath her palm, the wood was cold. She opened it. Stale air greeted her, laced with a strange sweetness. Not rot, not mildew. Something older, something preserved. A narrow stone stairwell led down, not unlike the one in the saloon, but this one felt different, sacred somehow, or maybe cursed. She descended one slow step at a time, her lantern casting trembling light against stone walls. At the bottom was a single room, smaller than the cellar, shaped like a circle, and in the center, a stone table. Not a table, an altar. A book lay open atop it, and beside it, a thick ledger bound in leather, the kind used to track debts. She approached it with careful breath. The ledger listed names, amounts, promises, most long crossed out, some underlined in red. The most recent entry was in fresh ink, debts carried forward, Mayfield line, no payment, just her name, and beneath it, one phrase, balance due upon return. Her mouth dried. The stranger had said they broke something. Clara's letters hinted at it. But now it was clear someone in her family had made a promise to this town. And the town never forgot. She looked up slowly, because in the reflection of her lantern's glass, something else had moved in the room with her. She didn't scream, didn't run. She just stared into the lantern's curved glass and watched the silhouette behind her shift slightly, like a person adjusting their stance, waiting for her to turn. But when she spun around, the room was empty again. Just the altar, just the ledger, just the flicker of flame. But the chill crawling across her neck told her something had changed. She climbed the steps slowly, one hand gripping the lantern, the other clenched so tightly around the edge of Clara's letter that the paper tore. When she reached the top, the hatch slammed shut behind her without warning. The wind had picked up, or maybe something else had moved it. Either way, the silence that followed rang louder than any sound. Outside, the sky had taken on a color she didn't recognize. It wasn't dusk anymore, but it wasn't night either. A deep orange bled across the horizon, and the sun hung low, too low, like it had stopped halfway down and forgotten how to fall. Shadows stretched long across the street, but never shifted. Time wasn't moving. The dog was gone. Her mare, still tied near the feed house, was uneasy now, pacing in place, ears twitching at sounds she couldn't hear. She called out softly, but her own voice felt swallowed by the town. She moved quickly down the main street, past the saloon, the general store, the blacksmith shop. Every building stood as it had, but something in them felt tilted, as if they were aware of her now, no longer passive, watching. The church bell rang. Once, she froze. It hadn't moved in years, but now it tolled again, slow, deliberate. 3 more times, each ring more deafening than the last. Her heart pounded in her ears. On the final toll, the windows of the saloon lit from within, not warmly, not with lanterns, but with a pale, flickering light. And inside the doorway stood the dog. She ran to it. It didn't move, didn't greet her, didn't wag its tail. It stared at her with the same intensity it had shown that first morning, only now its gaze felt resigned, like it had led her as far as it could go, like the rest was up to her. Then the clock over the bar began to tick, slowly, loudly. A clock she had checked earlier and found frozen. The hands stopped forever at 2:17. But now they moved jerky at first, then smooth. Tick, tick, tick. She backed away. The poker table, the cabinet, the hallway, every detail unchanged. And yet she knew the town was no longer just memory. It had come awake. And whatever had been waiting beneath the cellar, beneath the church, beneath her name, was no longer content to whisper. It wanted to speak. When she crossed the ridge the next morning, the ghost town was gone. No church, no saloon, no blacksmith shop, just open desert stretching in every direction, as if the buildings had never existed. The sky was clear, the wind was soft, and her mare moved steady beneath her, the saddle creaking like a heartbeat in her ears. But she knew better. The dust on her boots, the scar on her palm from grabbing the rusted altar, the old ledger tucked inside her saddlebag too real, too heavy. The town may have vanished from the land, but it hadn't vanished from her, and neither had the dog. It returned 3 days later, not with a bark or a scratch at the door, but with silence. She found it sitting at the edge of the cattle fence, watching the horizon, fur dusted with red clay. It didn't come close, just waited until she walked out, knelt in front of it, and whispered, "You brought me back." The dog blinked, then rose and walked away, disappearing once again into the brush. She never saw it again, but it had done its job. The next weeks moved in a blur. She contacted the county archive office with coordinates and the ledger. At first, they didn't believe her, called it a hoax. But when state records confirmed that a settlement had once existed exactly where she claimed, and when the soil samples came back with traces of forged metals used in 1,882 construction, and when an unfiled land deed in the ledger matched the missing township of Belmare, everything changed. She became the center of the storm. Newspapers ran headlines: "Rancher uncovers lost town, land tied to century, old blood pact." Ghost ledger sparks ownership dispute. Lawyers came, historians called, and somewhere in all of it, she gave a single interview. Just one. Quiet, calm. She didn't mention the church, or the whispers, or the door that closed on its own. She just said, "Some places remember more than others. Some debts take longer to collect." That was all she was willing to give. The town never appeared again. Satellite scans showed no trace. Drones captured nothing but scrub and stone. But she kept the letters, and the ledger, and the small book with her name scrawled on the first page, beside the words, "Balance settled." Life went on. Calves were born. Fences got mended. The house needed a new roof by spring. But every now and then, just before sunrise, she'd ride out to the edge of the property and watch the land where the town had stood. And for a brief second, if the wind hit just right, she swore she could hear the church bell. One soft toll, then silence. But it was never really silent, because once a place knows your name, it never forgets.